Hello everyone and welcome to our Model United Nations Korean Reunification lecture series. My name is Baranam and the Secretary General of an NGO that is PSCORE, working for North Korean human rights and unification of two Koreas. We are joined today by Arnold Fang, a researcher at Amnesty International since 2014, who has focused greatly on North Korean human rights issues, as well as South Korea, China, Japan, and Mongolia throughout his career. PSCORE has worked together with Mr. Fang on a joint side event on children's rights and enforced disappearances in North Korea at the UN Human Rights Council in 2019, organized by PSCORE and Amnesty International, as well as a 2016 side event focusing on advocating for North Korean human rights. The main question his lecture will tackle today is how can NGOs and international actors contribute to improving human rights in North Korea? Mr. Fang, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks very much to PSCORE for inviting me to this lecture series. I understand that everyone is participating in a model UN program, and so it's pleasure for me to represent Amnesty International, and I think also the civil society sector to be speaking to all of you about how international NGOs can make a difference in human rights issues, in particular on North Korea human rights. First, maybe we can go to the title slide. So today, well, I simplified the title a little bit, International NGOs and Human Rights in North Korea. And just want to mention that I come from Hong Kong, and I am the East Asia researcher of Amnesty International. I take care of a few countries, as Bada has mentioned. So by East Asia, it's actually mostly Northeast Asia for me. So the two Koreas, Japan, Mongolia, and yeah, that's basically it. China is taken care of by another team of colleagues. So I don't work on China that much, except when it has to do with North Koreans who got detained or forcibly repatriated from China. Then I would deal with China issues a little bit. Yes. So I will tell you a little bit more about the structure of Amnesty International, because that is important on how we can be functional in influencing governments on human rights situations in different countries. I understand that you have had one or two sessions about human rights in North Korea already, and well, I'm not sure like how familiar you are regarding the international human rights framework, but I just want to talk a little bit about like who is responsible for the human rights situation in a country. So just want to emphasize that ultimately it is the states or the governments that is responsible for the human rights situation in their jurisdiction. That means in the case of North Korea, like it is important to hold the North Korean government responsible for any human rights violations that is happening within the country. That means any kind of violation that is being perpetrated directly by the state or abused by non-state actors. For example, in case of any companies operating in North Korea that is involves overseas investment, but they are like abusing labor rights, then we still would hold the North Korean government responsible for these human rights abuses, even though it is not the government abusing the rights directly, because they have a right to protect the rights of everyone within their territory. Yes. So so with that, you probably ask, how about the UN? Would the UN be responsible for human rights in North Korea? Well, I think many people know that it is difficult to influence the North Korean government directly, given that it is difficult for NGOs to travel to North Korea, especially for human rights NGOs, because if you are humanitarian NGOs and you are bringing in resources to help the people, for example, who are suffering from food insecurity, there's a bigger chance that North Korean government would let you in. But as a human rights NGO, you have the stated objective of going there to monitor the human rights situation and documenting human rights violations, then probably like the government will not welcome NGOs like Amnesty International. So it is actually very difficult for anyone to talk to North Korea directly about human rights, except for other governments, like through diplomatic channels, or in such multilateral platforms like the UN. So as a result, a lot of the work on North Korea human rights is actually done through the UN. And as you probably know, governments, they would sign on to international human rights treaties. For example, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, or the Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. Yeah. So actually, the treaty bodies of these international human rights laws, they lie within the UN. So actually, any country signing on to these treaties, they get reviewed regularly by the UN treaty bodies as well. So as we progress, I will show you how like an organization like Amnesty can participate in those channels to influence any decisions or recommendations that are given to North Korea. So you probably have heard of this word mechanisms. So that's the word we use when we talk about the UN organizations or treaty bodies or review processes to hold states accountable to their human rights records. A little bit about civil society. Not sure if you have known about the distinction between CSOs and NGOs, but usually NGOs is considered a subset of civil society organization. So civil society organization could include other types of organizations, for example, religious organizations, churches, yeah, or sometimes academic institutions as well. Yeah, so anyone that could have a influence on states or the private sector on their policies could be, but do not belong to the government or the for-profit sector, can be considered CSO. Yeah. So there are many types of civil society organizations. As I have mentioned, there were two types already a few minutes ago. So some of them are involved in program or service delivery. So those humanitarian organizations going into North Korea to provide food or health services, they are really going in to fill in the gaps where the states cannot provide their services. So they cater to specific needs, and if possible, if they're given the access, that is, they would be there to reach vulnerable groups or populations. But of course, as you know, it's quite difficult to gain access to remote areas in North Korea. So like, if you're a humanitarian organization, typically the state tells you where you are going and what you can do, rather than you going there to assess the needs directly. And also the space for the space for monitoring humanitarian aid in North Korea is also very limited. So that I want to draw your attention. Yeah, but yeah, that's the first type of NGOs or CSOs, and I can tell you, Amnesty International does not do that. Yeah, we do not have a presence in North Korea. And the last time anyone from Amnesty International was able to visit North Korea was 1995, and that's 26 years ago. Yeah. But I personally, I have gone to North Korea in other capacities, even 2 years ago. Because I do teaching at the university, and I went with the university on some other work. So it's possible for me when traveling on personal capacity to go to North Korea. So what else? What do NGOs do? Well, the other group of NGOs would be those focusing on advocacy. Yes, so you probably are familiar with this word already. It's advocacy. It's about influencing decision makers, and of course, NGOs like Amnesty, we would hope to be able to talk to states or governments directly when possible. But of course, in the case of North Korea, the chance you actually get to encounter North Korean officials would be very rare. So it is important to go through other channels. So we actually would sometimes talk to states that have some sort of a relationship with North Korea. For example, those states that might come together with North Korea like every year for bilateral meeting, and those who are receptive to human rights issues, we would actually talk to them. So for example, we maintain some contact with the governments of Switzerland and Sweden, and they are usually perceived by North Korea to be somewhat more neutral, and but there are also countries that care about human rights. So it is quite like we try to make use of those channels whenever possible. But the other channel that is very useful and where Pada and I have worked together would be the UN mechanisms. Yeah, so we, as Pada said, we were in Geneva together. Actually, more than once. We were there in 2016 and then 2019 together at the Human Rights Council. And fortunately and thankfully, civil society organizations have access to these UN mechanisms as long as they are able to register for a consultative status with the UN. Yeah. So Amnesty International is such an organization, and if you look at the picture in the slide, the nameplate on the seat, it says ONG. It actually stands for NGO, but it is the abbreviation in French. So, and this setting is probably the Human Rights Council. So you can see that the NGO actually gets a seat when all these different country governments, they get together for the Human Rights Council meeting. And then we would get our statements ready and deliver our statements there. But it's not only like oral statements that we deliver. There are actually multiple opportunities to intervene into these different UN mechanisms, and I will go over them one by one briefly in this presentation. So, well, Amnesty International is a worldwide human rights movement. We were founded in 1961. So actually this year marks the 60th anniversary of Amnesty International. So our mandate was more limited in the early days. We were founded in the United Kingdom, but by this lawyer called Peter Benenson. You can see his picture on the right-hand upper corner of the slide. So our mandate earlier was more focused on such issues as death penalty and the rights of prisoners. So, for example, the right to be free from torture, yeah, and the right to have access to lawyer and have communication with family. Yeah. Yeah. But now we work on the full spectrum of human rights issues, and ranging from civil political rights to economic, social, and cultural rights. So, yeah, we work on LGBTI rights, discrimination, gender issues, refugees, and like more up and coming would be issues such as technology and human rights, the impacts, let's say, on of surveillance technology on human rights, and also we even work on climate change these days. So yeah, it's a very large movement. We have structures and sections in many different countries, and we are funded almost mostly by membership. We do not receive government funding except for one or two very specific programs like human rights education. We do receive money from the Norwegian government for that, but other than that, like, we basically are funded mostly by our members paying monthly fees to us. Yeah. So the reason why we want to stay this way is because we want to remain independent from any government. So we are able to remain authoritative in speaking against any government that perpetrate human rights violations when necessary. Yeah. So maybe a little bit about the structure. So we have an international secretariat, and it includes regional offices. And I belong to the International Secretariat, and I'm stationed in the regional office for East and Southeast Asia and Pacific, and I'm stationed in Hong Kong. Yes. So the International Secretariat has staff covering almost all the countries in the world as researchers, and also it is there to support all the different sections that are established in countries. So like the International Secretariat is able to coordinate the campaigns. For example, like how would, for example, South Korea know about a campaign that we are now doing on Syria? That would rely on the International Secretariat. Yeah. But that said, we do have country sections or national offices set up in the different countries. So the country sections, they would be doing a number of activities in their respective countries. For example, mainly campaigning, so getting the local population involved into the campaign work, not only of domestic issues, but also international issues. Yeah. So probably you might have seen in your country like Amnesty International activities, and you probably see that they don't only talk about the issues in your own country, but they raise your awareness about human rights violations that are happening outside your country as well. Yeah. So that's one thing that they do. They try to gather your support so that like people from different countries can have a voice in influencing the human rights situation in some of the worst places in the world. Yeah. And also they have the important role of fundraising as well. So they maintain a membership in each country, and this includes paying members that keeps the movement going. Yeah. So if you're in South Korea, you probably will know that we do have a section in South Korea as well. So a little bit back to our research work. So some of us have a regional focus. Me, I am a regional researcher for East Asia, but increasingly important is that we also have teams that have a thematic focus, because like me, even though I can speak some of the languages that I have to work in, like it is not possible for me to know every human rights issue equally well. So like very often I need to rely on, let's say, expert on gender issues or expert on, let's say, business and human rights to provide their expertise to my work in the countries. Yeah. So we also have teams that have a thematic focus. Yeah. So those are called global issues, and then we in the regional teams would consult with them and work together when necessary. And of course, we have some functional teams as well, because only doing research work is not enough. Like we need to look for ways to reach our audience. And as I will mention later, like it is increasingly demanding. People are absorbing so much information, like each day, and then it's not easy for us to get their attention easily. So we have functional teams that help us do communications work and do human rights education, and like look for various creative ways to get people involved. So here are some of the issues that we have worked on, and it's not comprehensive, but at least like these are the issues that we have touched in the last few years. So forced repatriation is one of them, especially because we are located in Hong Kong, and we have like close proximity to China. Like we tend to focus a lot on those North Koreans who get who leave their countries but get arrested in China and are like forcibly repatriated as a result. Yeah, and we ask China not to forcibly repatriate people to North Korea. Yeah, and we work on political prison camps. Of course, not that we are able to see or visit any of these camps because we do not have access to them, but we do these by way of technology. So you see this photo that says Camp 15. Yeah, we actually work with a group of analysts who are able to look at aerial satellite photos that show changes of the political prison camps over time, and then we would make reports to the to those who are interested or to the media every now and then about changes that we can observe in the political prison camps. We work a lot on freedom of expression. That is an area of research that I'm involved personally, and actually we've done some interviews with the help of PSCORE in this area as well. So we continue to be vocal in this area. We think that like information going in and out of North Korea should not be restricted, at least not restricted the way it is now. North Korean people should have the opportunity to get to know what the outside world is like, yeah, and they should also be able to contact any family and friends that have left their country. But at present, if they try to do any of the above things, they could be subject to heavy punishment. More recently, we started working on enforced disappearance. That means the abduction of people from other countries into North Korea. And if you look at the picture on the lower right-hand corner, this is Mr. Wang Yinchao. We actually were with him and Pada in a side event 2 years ago in Geneva, because 2019, that was the 50th anniversary of the disappearance of his father. Like his father was captured to North Korea on a hijacked plane when he was traveling back to Seoul from the east side of the country. His father was a TV producer. Yeah. So yeah, so he has not heard from his father all these years, but he has been still like campaigning very fervently for his father. So we decided to take the opportunity of the 50th anniversary to give him some support, and we listed his father as one of our individual cases. And finally, one thing that we do care about, but we find it not easy to work on, is the right to food and the right to health. Yeah, so the report on the upper right-hand corner, this was released 10 years ago already. Like at that time, we were already writing about the healthcare system in North Korea. I haven't joined Amnesty at that point, but yeah, but last year during COVID, we have done some interviews through our South Korea section with former healthcare workers in North Korea, and we got to know a little bit more about what the healthcare system is like nowadays and what might be the situation with COVID-19 threatening the country. Yes. So these are the areas of my work. Yeah, and yeah, we do not work on each and every of these every year, but we would take opportunities to get ourselves updated whenever possible. So research is necessary because we need to gather evidence on the ground before we can use this information to make any kind of conclusion and talk to policymakers, including at the UN and to state governments. So we use multiple ways of doing research. We have desk research, and we do interviews on the ground. And I used to travel to South Korea regularly and talk to North Koreans, but of course that is not possible during COVID-19. And but after a year of very slow activity, I think we need to look for ways to start talking to people remotely again. So we'll look at how to get that started, and maybe it will take the form of going through a camera, what we are doing now. Yes. So with the information that we gathered, we would author various kinds of outputs. For example, we have thematic reports. For example, this one called Connection Denied. It focuses on restrictions on the use of mobile phones and accessing outside information. A few years ago already, it was 5 years ago when we put this out. And other than that, we have an annual report every year where we would give an update on the human rights situation in every country that we work on. So this year is the first time that I have to produce the update for 4 countries, so North Korea, South Korea, Japan, and Mongolia. And it's not usually very long. For a country like China, it probably will have the longest entry, 3,000 words. We do about 1,200 words for North Korea and South Korea, and for some other countries that are of a lower priority. For example, Mongolia, it could be shorter, 500 words. Yeah, but this is something that we put out every year. And our South Korea, section, they actually translate the entries into Korean, and we do get some good coverage by media whenever we put out an annual report. Yeah. So those are public facing, but we also would do some shorter outputs every now and then, especially when we hear of things happening. We would react in the form of media outputs like press release, or we would send op-eds, opinions to the editors, to some newspapers as well. So I don't know if you knew about the two fishermen that ended up in South Korea waters about a year and a half ago now, and the South Korean government sent them back to North Korea, and it was the first time that South Korea decided to repatriate North Koreans. And of course, we know that if the South Korean government repatriates anyone that has attempted to leave North Korea, that actually leaves them at risk, because they could be imprisoned and punished, and who knows what happens when they're imprisoned. Yeah. So in order to quickly show our opinion and try to influence the government, we put out op-eds through the South Korean media. Yeah. And another important output that we do is would be the submissions to the United Nations. And I will mention that in greater detail later. So remember I said earlier that there are all these different mechanisms in the UN where the human rights records of a country is being reviewed. So there are ways for NGOs to provide a opinion to the reviewers. So we would do this in the form of submissions, and I will tell you the different kinds of opportunities later. Yeah. So as I said, this research is important because it forms the base of all our campaigns and advocacy work. And without sound research and good information, it is difficult to build a voice that is authoritative and influential. So we tend to emphasize the importance of research very much at Amnesty. As said earlier, advocacy means influencing decision makers. And there are different modes of advocacy, but it is important to look for the right opportunities, because decision makers are often very busy people, and it is difficult to capture their attention. So it is important to make our opinions heard at the right time, taking the right opportunities and looking for the right hooks to make our opinions. So of course, it's not easy for us to talk to North Korean officials because we do not have a country section there, nor are we able to travel to North Korea. But we tend to do a lot of international advocacy for North Korea. So, as I said, we go through other governments and we go through UN channels. So when we go through other governments, it is called a bilateral channel. So we have mainly relied on European countries for that in the past. Some countries you may think they may look very strong. For example, the United States. But for example, we do not tend to think of the United States as a very good candidate for pursuing this kind of bilateral advocacy because of the sort of animosity or relationships between the US and North Korea. So like that would likely cause North Korea not want to listen to the United States. So my preference is for countries that are perceived by North Korea to be somewhat neutral, but also proponents on human rights. So that's why I tend to go through countries that I mentioned earlier, like Sweden and Switzerland. But I've been also trying to look for countries within Asia that itself has a good human rights record and is willing to talk to North Korea, but I haven't been very successful yet. So we also try to go through South Korea sometimes, but then of course like the relations between South and North Korea is also very political, and it is not easy for human rights to be included in the agenda. And worse, sometimes like the human rights agenda could get hijacked by the certain political groups as well, especially those who would like to who would like to attack North Korea using the human rights reasons. So that's why it's not easy to find what we call a interlocutor to talk to North Korea, but we try our very best there. Yeah. So that leaves us with the UN. So let's go to the next slide first, opportunities in the UN. So we take various opportunities, and reviews of North Korea is always a good time for us to present our information, because it gives us a reason to organize all our information in North Korea and to present it in a concise manner. For example, in the Universal Periodic Review. So the Universal Periodic Review is actually a peer review process for like all the member countries of the UN. So every country gets reviewed in the UPR every 4 to 5 years. And this has just happened for North Korea in 2019. And actually, North Korea would prefer for countries or NGOs to intervene in human rights issues through the UPR rather than so-called special procedures, which is in the bottom of this list. Special procedures would include country-specific procedures. So you probably know that for North Korea, there is a special rapporteur of the UN that looks at the human rights situation in DPRK, which is North Korea. But North Korea tends to hate this kind of country-specific procedures because they tend to look at it as singling them out. Yeah, but for something like the UPR, like every countries get review, and North Korea seems less embarrassed in that sense, and that they think it's a fairer process. So it is important to make use of this UPR process to make any recommendations that you feel it's important. Of course, North Korea can choose whether to accept the recommendations or not. And note one thing, we as NGOs do not make the recommendations in the UPR. Rather, we have to make our submission and go through all the different governments that are participating in the UPR and ask them to make the recommendations on our behalf. So in that sense, it is both advocacy at the UN, but also talking to governments that are participating in the process, so that they could make recommendations that we care about to North Korea. Yes. So there's the UPR, but there are also specific treaty bodies. So in recent years, North Korea has shown some participation in the Covenant on the Rights of the Child, so it's a treaty on children's rights, and also on CSORE. So that's the Covenant on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. So it's about children's rights and women's rights, and North Korea was willing to be reviewed. So NGOs would send submissions to those treaty bodies as well. So in those treaty bodies, you don't try to influence governments, because it is not a peer review process, but rather there is a committee from the treaty body that is involved in the review of North Korea. So we try to send our submissions ahead of time, and if possible, then we go to Geneva actually and try to meet the members of the committee before the review, so we can tell them what we care about and ask them to raise it for us during the review meeting. Yes. So that's a very major part of my work. So I have to do that not only for North Korea, but also the other countries. And of course, it's not possible to come up with a submission for every treaty body review. So we have to choose and be strategic about it. Yeah. And then every year there are 2 resolutions on North Korea human rights. And one is during the General Assembly in November or December, and the other one is in the Human Rights Council in March. And here, usually, there are 2 ways to influence. One way is that you try to influence the content, and Amnesty International has a pretty good presence in New York and Geneva. So sometimes we are able to get advance copies of the text of the resolution, and we may be able to put in 1 or 2 comments, or 1 or 2 comments, and even be able to participate in the meetings where country governments discuss the content of the resolution. Yeah. And the other way to influence is to influence the voting, but more in the recent years, usually the resolutions on North Korea human rights were adopted without a vote. That means countries would agree by consensus to adopt the resolution, whereas those countries, typically like China, that do not agree with the resolution, they would just remove themselves from the decision. Yeah. So these are all opportunities at the UN. So and finally, I mentioned special procedures. North Korea doesn't like country-specific procedures, but on the other hand, the only UN human rights official that was given an invitation to visit North Korea was actually another special rapporteur, and she worked on the rights of people with disability. So that is a new phenomenon, and it happened 4 years ago. So it shows that it is actually possible for us to influence North Korea through not the country-specific special procedure, but through thematic special procedures. So we may look at possibilities of going through other special rapporteurs, like if anyone is working on the right to food, for example, like that could be someone that we can go through. But we, of course, because we have limited resources, and I do not travel to Europe all the time, so it's not easy for me to tack on to these special procedures. But I think it is a direction to move into in the future. And just a little bit about how we make use of these opportunities. So under activities, sometimes we would do letters and written briefs. So we draft long letters, or even a document stating the issues that we want to have some influence on. And we will organize meetings. And it is important to notice that there are official as well as unofficial meetings. And we sometimes organize briefings as well. So maybe we have enough information that we want to present to, let's say, all the ambassadors from the EU that are in Seoul, then we would ask our South Korea section to help us organize a briefings. And we do the same in at the UN. So Pada mentioned that we would travel to the Human Rights Council, for me, every now and then. I know Pada goes every year, and we would organize side events so that diplomats from different countries can come and listen to what we have to say about human rights in North Korea. So yeah, I know the time is running short. So I'd just like to talk a bit briefly about campaigning. Everything that we mentioned just now was about us doing research and talking to governments or talking in the UN directly. But Amnesty International wants to do more than that, because we very much emphasize that we are a people's movement, and we claim that we have more than 10 million supporters and activists that have participated in our past actions. So we actually think that just Amnesty talking is not enough. Rather, we want to get people talking about human rights. So we actually get them to take action on injustices worldwide. So we would sometimes use cases that we encounter and create these actions called urgent actions. And through our network over the world, through our country sections, publicize it to everyone and get those activists or supporters who are interested to write letters to try to change the situation. For example, here is an urgent action that we created for Mr. Huang Won at the 50th anniversary of his disappearance. So we thought that it would be a good opportunity for many letters to arrive in North Korea at the same time, showing the government that it's been 50 years, but we still care. And we know that Huang Won is turning 82 years old that year, and he does not have much more time to have a reunion with his family if he's still living. So, please allow Mr. Huang to get in contact with his son. So, so we would do something like this. We would create a model letter, and people could choose to send that model letter signed with their name to North Korean government, or they can choose to write their own letter as well. So that is called an urgent action. And we also have something that is longer term, and it's called an individual case file. So we would continually campaign for these individuals until we see changes in the situation. And so that is the work on individuals, but we also do campaigning on human rights issues, because increasingly we think that it's not only that we need to campaign for the freedom of certain individuals, but rather we need certain laws or policies to change. For example, we sometimes would campaign for the closure of the political prison camps, or we would ask North Korea to change, to relax their restrictions on information exchange with the outside world. And if we look at the next slide, slide number 10, it shows Edward Snowden. And we also think that sometimes campaigning on the same topic globally it could help change the situation in different countries as well. So we spoke very widely on the issue of surveillance of communications. And of course, we know that issues exist in many countries. It exists in North Korea, like phones are being tapped, but it exists in countries that are seemingly more civilized, like the United States. That's where Edward Snowden is being hunted for what he has done to expose the truth. So that's why we try to capture the synergy between different countries on the same issues. Yeah. Challenges. I think it is increasingly difficult for us to capture audience attention because of the way in which information is being received, especially with the advance of social media. Like people, they do not like to read long reports, but rather information is being received in a kind of very quick, very short pieces kind of way. So it makes us rethink like what should be our strategy. And also as the movement itself is growing, like we find ourselves working with more and more resources, more and more issues, but then resources are also limited. So like we really need to know like how best to focus and what to work on where in order to have the maximum impact. And as you probably know, many governments are now, in many countries, like governments are turning more and more authoritarian and like, or more and more illiberal. So we tend to think that the space available for civil society is shrinking. So of course, there's almost no space for civil society in North Korea. But then if the space for civil society in other countries are also shrinking, then like it affects us to effectively use international advocacy channels. So this is another restriction for us, and we also hate to see that like well technology can help our work, but it is also being used by governments to restrict people's rights. So yeah, it's something that is continuing presenting a challenge to us. So one thing that we try to do in the next slide 12 is actually to equip human rights defenders. That means those who are activists and working to defend human rights, to make sure that they are safely operating in their countries. Because as the surveillance is getting more and more severe, it is getting harder and harder for them to work safely. So we try to do that worldwide with human rights defenders. And with North Koreans who left their countries but are working on human rights, we actually try to also connect them with the international human rights community. So what we've been doing in the past few years is this capacity building program, and we actually worked with one human rights organization in South Korea that is working on North Korea, and tried to get them to do the things that Amnesty have been doing. That means documenting human rights violations, and sending submissions to the UPR process that I mentioned earlier. So, so in that way, North Koreans who have left the country, they become more literate and conversant in terms of international human rights law, and are able to make their voices heard in the international human rights community. How you can participate in the work of Amnesty International. So probably you have a section in your own country. So it's always possible to get connected with them. And also you can always take action by looking at their website to see like what kind of petitions are available and you can also join our networks in writing letters, whether it's for urgent action or our annual event. It is called Write for Rights, where we get people to write for human rights defenders all over the world. And also we offer online learning programs. We have courses on digital security. We have courses on refugee rights, and you are welcome to look for these online. Yes. So I think I better stop here so we have some time left for questions and discussion. Yeah.
Right, thank you again, Mr. Fang, for sharing your insights with us today. So we have some participants joining us who would like to ask you a few questions. To those joining us on Zoom, please use the raise hand button if you have a question for Mr. Fang. So we have a question from Sandra.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Mr. Fang. So my question is, what is Amnesty's perspective on the reunification of the two Koreas? Is there any perspective, is there any view, or are they neutral in this issue?
Thanks for that question. It's it's actually a good one. We do not have a view on reunification. Rather, we as long as North and South Korea exists as two countries, then we think each of the governments are responsible for the human rights situation in their own countries. But we do not tell countries whether they should reunite or not, because it is we don't think that there is that effect on human rights whether the countries are reunited or not. Yeah. And of course, we do look at issues like transitional justice, although we do not work very actively on that, but we are very much aware in case of any drastic change in North Korea. For example, if the government suddenly falls apart, then mass human rights violations could happen even with the absence of the current government. So yeah, those issues we are aware of, but we do not publicly hold an opinion on reunification.
Okay, we have one final question from Tohi. Please, Tohi, go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much for the lecture. I had a question about Amnesty International's accessibility towards North Korea. So back in 1996, what was the reason Amnesty International visited North Korea? And if you could enter in North Korea at this point, what would Amnesty International do for the citizens of North Korea?
Back in 1996, I think, back in 1995, actually, I think, Amnesty International entered through an international, there was a mechanism for the international exchange of parliamentarians. Yeah, I think it was through that kind of activity that Amnesty was able to get access. Yeah, but ever since, it has not been our application to visit the country have not been answered yet. Actually, we haven't seen any replies of North Korea to any communications that we have sent to them. So yeah, we don't know when will be the next time we are able to go there again. But if we have the chance to talk to them, we will have to be very strategic. I think certain things we will raise. For example, some of the more severe human rights violations probably we'll briefly mention, but prison camps, of course, we'll ask us one or two questions or not, but if they do not want to talk about it, on the first visit, it's something that we may not have to go into depth yet, but I think we want to work on issues that they want to work on. Yeah, in particular, if they are willing to talk to the outside world about children's rights and about women's rights, I think it is important that we raise those issues. And also, all the research that we've been doing on the freedom of information, I think it is good timing to raise it, because it is North Korea is in a time where information technology is going through going through development on a daily basis. So I think it is important to show that yes, it's good that you have this kind of development, but we do not want to see more censorship or surveillance with that. So that's something that we would want to raise. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. And I also have another question. When you spoke about advocacy, you have mentioned that both national and international advocacy is necessary for successful advocacy. So since South Korea is the nearest country in terms of location and history to North Korea, I was wondering if Amnesty International Korea or AIK should be directing the advocacy that Amnesty International in general is conducting towards North Korea. And I'd also like to know your opinion on whether AIK should prioritize this issue over other humanitarian crises in South Korea.
Okay, I think each country has their own mandate, but actually AI Korea does have a small team working on North Korea, and they talk to people coming from North Korea regularly. Yes, in terms of influencing the government, I think we have the room to do a lot more in terms of influencing the South Korean government. But as you know, like situation between the current government and North Korea has become like pretty complicated, and like it's not easy even for the South Korean government to raise human rights issues. But the problem is, yeah, we like a lot of it relies on whether we have the right opportunities or not. And basically the assessment from AIK right now is that in terms of like influence on South Korean government on North Korea, like it is not a very good timing right now, but rather like because as Amnesty, we have multiple channels and we could go through different governments. So that's why like we have chosen to go through governments that have more regular contact with North Korea. Yeah. Yeah, but they are doing work on North Korea. Yeah, to give you an answer.
Okay, we are out of time. So this concludes today's lecture. And thank you, Arnold, for joining us today and contributing to our Model United Nations lecture series. Thank you.
Thanks for inviting me. Yes. Okay.
All right. So and also thank you to all of our participants as well for joining us today. Thank you.